It starts with a whisper, a sound so soft you almost mistake it for the wind moving through the trees. But when you turn, the forest is still. Then you see a faint light drifting between the shadows. It dances, almost inviting you closer. And before you realize it, your feet are already moving. That's how they lure you. That's how they've always lured us. Long before the fairies of children's tales, before wings and wands and glittering dust, there were beings the old Gaelic tribes called the Tuatha Dé Danann. They were gods once, radiant and terrible. But when their altars fell silent, they were cursed to fade into the earth, not dead, not alive, something else entirely. Those who follow their light never return the same. Some are found centuries later, untouched by age. Others are never found at all. They say the fairy realm lies just beyond the veil of twilight, a place where time folds, where beauty hides hunger, and where the gods of old still remember what we took from them. So, if you ever hear that whisper, or see that flicker of light in the dark, run, because tonight, we're uncovering the horrifying truth behind the Gaelic gods and the cursed realm of the fairies. There are places where the world feels almost unreal, where the familiar hum of life falters and the edges of reality fray like worn fabric. In Ireland, they call them thin places spots, where the veil between the mortal realm and something older, stranger, and far more powerful grows fragile. These are not marked on maps. They are measured in shadows and whispers, in the weight of air that seems too thick for the lungs. A traveler might stumble upon one without realizing it. Perhaps it is a forest where the trees press together so tightly that no sunlight reaches the moss-covered floor, leaving everything in a perpetual half-light. Perhaps it is a hill shrouded in mist, the stones beneath your feet, older than history itself, silent, witnesses to 1,000 forgotten ceremonies. And perhaps, on a lone moor at dusk, the wind sighs through the heather, carrying the faintest echo of a name you almost remember. In these places, the rules of the ordinary world falter. Time stretches and contracts, the air hums with expectation, and something watches from just beyond perception. It is not evil, at least, not in a way humans understand. It is ancient, intelligent, alien. It is the domain of the fair folk, the Ishi of the Hollow Hills, beings who once ruled Ireland as gods before mortals drove them into hiding. Those who have survived encounters with them learned the first and most important lesson: do not name them aloud. The wrong word, spoken carelessly, is a summons. The wrong glance is an invitation. These are not the whimsical creatures of modern fairy tales. They are the dispossessed nobility of a fallen pantheon, still proud, still clever, and still capable of judgment that mortals cannot comprehend. Long ago, before humans claimed dominion over the land, these beings walked openly among men. They brought with them treasures of immense power: the Stone of Destiny, the Sword of Nada, the Spear of Lugh, and the Cauldron of Plenty. They fought wars against monstrous rivals, the Fomorans, whose chaotic and destructive might threatened all creation. And when mortals finally arrived with a new kind of power, they were forced to retreat, not vanishing, but sequestering themselves in a parallel kingdom hidden beneath the hills, accessible only to those who knew how to look. Even today, they linger. They watch from the shadows, from the mists that curl along the riverbanks and the hollows of the oldest hills. The Ishi remember their glory and their loss. They measure humans by our respect for the laws that still govern their world, the power of iron, the perils of their food, the sacredness of a true name. To cross their boundaries without care is to invite disaster. So, the next time you wander into a lonely forest, follow a winding path up a misty hill, or hear a whisper in the dying light, pause, look closely, listen. The world you know is only one layer of reality. Beyond it lies another, a kingdom that mirrors your own, yet obeys rules older than civilization, filled with beings both magnificent and terrifying. And some part of you already knows. If you are not careful, you may never leave. Thomas O'Malley had always been drawn to the hills beyond his village. Their slopes rose gently from the fields like the backs of sleeping giants, cloaked in mist and crowned with the twisted silhouettes of ancient oak. The villagers whispered of the hollow hills' ancient burial mounds, doorways to places where humans were not welcome. Thomas ignored the warnings. Curiosity was a hunger he could not quell. On an October evening when the sun hung low like molten gold over the horizon, Thomas followed a winding path he had never noticed before. The air smelled of damp earth and something sweeter, almost like honey burned by sunlight. A chill ran along his spine as the fog thickened, curling around his ankles, swallowing the ground beneath his feet. He stepped carefully, listening to the strange silence, broken only by the whispering wind through the blackened heather. Then he saw her. She appeared from the mist as if born of it, a woman taller than any mortal Thomas had ever seen. Her hair cascading like a river of moonlight, eyes like pools of liquid silver. She did not walk, she glided, each movement effortless, as though the air itself bent around her. Thomas felt both awe and fear, the primal instinct that told him to flee warring with an irresistible pull toward her. "Thomas," she said, her voice a melody that resonated inside his chest. "I have been waiting." He did not know how she knew his name. His lips parted, but no sound came. The world around him seemed to shimmer, edges of reality trembling like a reflection in disturbed water. He had read tales of fair folk, stories told by old women by peat fires, warnings of beauty that ensnared men and never let go. And yet, standing before him, this being was more real, more alive than anything else he had ever encountered. "Do not fear," she said. "Come with me. There is a place you have never seen, a world beyond your imagining." Thomas stepped forward, heart hammering in his chest. The air grew warmer, sweeter, carrying the scent of flowers that had never bloomed in his village. The ground beneath his feet seemed to soften, glowing faintly with an inner light. As he followed her into the hill, the mist thickened, swirling into shapes, arches, towers, and bridges of translucent crystal that defied logic. Laughter echoed faintly, like wind chimes, and shadows of beings moved just beyond the corner of his vision. Time began to lose its meaning. Thomas did not notice the sun sink or rise. Days, or what felt like days, passed in a haze of feasts, music, and dances that never seemed to end. And yet, in the back of his mind, a whisper of fear grew. This was no ordinary world. It was beautiful, intoxicating, but it was not his own. The queen of this place watched him with eyes that could pierce the soul, a smile that promised delight, but hinted at peril. When at last she spoke of gifts and commands, Thomas listened, unaware of the cost that would follow. He would leave with the power to see the future, but he could never return to the life he had known. 7 years had passed while he thought it only 3 days, and the world he had once belonged to would never feel the same. The first step into the hollow hills had been easy. The second, far more dangerous. Thomas stumbled out of the hollow hill and into the world he had once known. The mist that had swallowed him vanished as if it had never existed, leaving him blinking against the harsh glare of a sun he no longer recognized. Alien. Houses had aged, streets had shifted, and faces he remembered were lined with time he had not felt. 3 days, he thought, but the truth sank like a stone in his chest. 7 years had passed. No one ran to greet him. No one called his name with the warmth he had remembered. Children he had once played with were now grown, and some of the elders had passed into graves he had never tended. His own family stared at him with suspicion, whispering as he approached. The world moved on without him, and he was left behind, a ghost of the life he had known. But the gift the queen had promised pulsed in his mind. His tongue, touched by the otherworldly power, could not lie. Truth tumbled from him like water from a broken dam, startling even Thomas with its force. He saw things not yet come, dangers that lurked in the shadows, paths of fortune and misfortune twisting before him like threads on a loom. Yet the knowledge was heavy, a burden that pressed against his ribs and gnawed at his sleep. The villagers recoiled when he tried to share his visions. Madness, they muttered. A curse from the hills. And perhaps they were right. For the dreams that came to him at night were not only glimpses of what might be, they were whispers of the unseelie court, shadows of the Fae that had lingered even as he returned. Laughter, cold and mocking, echoed in empty rooms. Shapes moved just beyond the edges of his vision. And sometimes, when the wind blew from the hills, Thomas could swear he heard the Queen's voice, reminding him that every gift had a price. He wandered the village streets, seeking understanding, seeking some measure of peace. Yet every glance, every encounter, reminded him of what he had lost. Friends no longer remembered him, lovers had aged beyond recognition, and the life he might have lived had been quietly erased. His prophetic words, though true, brought only fear and suspicion, a warning of storms yet to come, of fires that would consume homes, of illnesses that would claim children. He spoke, but few listened, and fewer believed. In the stillness of the night, Thomas realized the cruelest part of his fate. The Queen's gift had not liberated him. It had imprisoned him in knowledge. He could not be a man of simple joys, nor could he fully return to the mundane rhythms of human life. Every heartbeat, every breath, carried the weight of the hidden world he had touched. The fair folk had given him the power to see beyond, but in doing so, they had set him apart from his own kind, a bridge between worlds that should never meet. And so Thomas O'Malley became both legend and caution. A man touched by the unseelie court, a mortal with the burden of truth, wandering the edge of two worlds, knowing that the beauty he had once adored had a darkness that could never be escaped. The hollow hills still waited, and one day Thomas knew they would call him again. The village had grown quieter since Thomas's return, yet an unease hung in the air, subtle but undeniable. Mothers whispered behind doors, and fathers cast wary glances at their cradles. The fair folk, Thomas realized with a shiver, did not merely dwell in distant hills. They could slip through the fragile veil of everyday life. It began one gray morning when a neighbor, a woman named Maeve, came running to Thomas's door, her eyes wide with terror. "They've taken him," she gasped. "My Liam, gone, replaced by something else." She held out a bundle swaddled in faded cloth. Inside lay a baby, pale and frail, its eyes too sharp, too calculating. Thomas studied the child, noting the unnatural way it twitched and the cold intelligence that lingered in its gaze. He knew immediately, this was no child. This was a changeling. In the stories told by elders, the changeling was a creature of nightmare. Fairies coveted human infants, sometimes to strengthen their own dying race, sometimes to pay the tithe to hell. They left one of their own behind, a thing of malice and cunning, disguised as a human infant. The myths had always seemed distant, cautionary tales whispered by firelight. But now Thomas saw the horror with his own eyes. The creature's cry was not a baby's wail, but a piercing shriek that cut through the morning air like a blade. It sucked the energy from the room, draining the family's hope, their resources, their very joy. Maeve clutched at it, sobbing, pleading for it to be her son. The changeling only stared back, unblinking, its tiny mouth twisting into what Thomas could only interpret as a cruel imitation of a smile. He warned Maeve of the old ways, of iron and fire, of rituals meant to unmask the fairy. But the village had forgotten these methods, just as it had forgotten respect for the Hollow Hills. They recoiled from Thomas's advice, calling him mad, a prophet of lies, while the changeling thrived in the shadow of their disbelief. And yet, Thomas could feel the pulse of the other world pressing close. The fairy realm was watching, testing him, reminding him that his return had not freed him from their reach. That night, Thomas stood by the window of Maeve's cottage, listening to the distant whisper of the hills. The unseelie court moved in shadows, unseen but felt, their laughter drifting through the wind like a promise or a threat. He realized that the horrors of the fair folk were not confined to legends or the distant past. They existed in every shadow, every cradle, every quiet moment when a parent's gaze faltered. And in that realization, Thomas understood the terrible truth. Knowledge was a curse. He could see the danger, know the signs, warn the living, but he could not stop it. The fair folk operated on a scale beyond human comprehension, and for every child taken, for every bargain struck, the mortal world was powerless. Only the rules of the ancient courts applied, and those were written not in kindness, but in the unforgiving logic of an immortal order. As the first snow of winter dusted the village rooftops, Thomas swore he would watch over Maeve's child, however unnatural it might be. The changeling terror had come to the village, and he was its only witness, a man marked by both worlds, standing at the fragile boundary between mortal life and the relentless, unyielding power of the fair folk. Thomas could feel the pulse of the hills even before he approached them. The mist rolled across the valleys like slow-moving water, curling around gnarled oaks and crumbling stone walls. The villagers avoided these paths, muttering about the unseelie court and the ill fate that befell those who lingered too long. But Thomas had no choice. He had to understand the power that had marked his life and now threatened the village. The hills were alive with sound, not the chirping of birds or the rustle of leaves, but subtle, layered whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Voices in a language older than memory. They spoke in riddles, in half-formed promises, in threats that pricked the skin like needles. Thomas felt his tongue itch, remembering the Queen's gift, the tongue that could not lie. Every word he spoke here would carry truth, and every truth might draw attention. He came upon a shallow hollow where the grass shimmered with frost, and in the center stood a ring of mushrooms, perfectly round, perfectly sinister. The air smelled of damp earth and something metallic, a tang that made Thomas gag. He knelt to examine the circle, noting the tiny footprints that circled within it. They were not human, not entirely. They hinted at a form familiar yet impossible, as though a child had been stretched into inhuman proportions. Suddenly, the whispers coalesced into words he could understand, spoken in a voice that was both male and female, old and young. "You have seen too much, mortal. Why do you trespass?" Thomas swallowed, the cold biting at his lungs. "I seek knowledge," he replied, his voice steady. "I seek to protect those who cannot protect themselves." The air shimmered. A figure emerged from the mist, tall and impossibly thin, draped in robes of mist and shadow. Its eyes glowed faintly, like coals in a dying fire. "You carry the gift of tongues," it said, "and yet you are still bound by flesh. You will learn that words alone do not save. Only understanding, only respect can shield the living from the hidden world." Thomas felt the weight of its gaze press into him, and in that moment, he glimpsed visions. Children lifted from cradles, gardens withering under unseen curses, entire families falling into despair under bargains they did not understand. Each image was punctuated by laughter high, cruel, and alien. The fair folk were not evil in the human sense. They were indifferent, natural forces incarnate, capable of mercy, but never bound by morality. "You must walk among them," the figure continued, fading into the mist. "Learn their ways. Know the boundaries. For the thin places are many, and the mortal world grows blind. The reckoning comes not with swords, but with neglect." Thomas rose, shaken, but determined. He understood now that the changeling terror was only the beginning. The village, the fields, the forests, all were part of a living web, and every human misstep invited the gaze of the other world. He would have to learn the language of the hills, the signs of the unseelie hunt, the bargains whispered in the twilight. Only then could he hope to protect those who did not even know they were at risk. As he made his way back to the village, the mist thickened, closing the path behind him. The hills seemed to watch, silent but alert. And Thomas knew that he had crossed a threshold. There was no turning back. The fair folk were waiting, and he was now bound to their world as irrevocably as he was to his own. The village seemed unchanged when Thomas returned, but he knew better. The air felt thicker, heavier, as though the hills themselves were exhaling a warning. People went about their daily tasks, unaware of the invisible web of bargains and debts that threaded through every home. Children laughed, women drew water from the well, and men mended fences, all under the watchful gaze of forces they could not perceive. Thomas kept to the shadows, listening. He had learned from the hills that the fair folk did not act openly. They operated in whispers and gestures, subtle signs that the untrained eye would never notice. A missing tool, a stolen loaf of bread, a sudden illness in a child. Each was a thread in a tapestry of influence, a reminder that the mortal world was never truly separate. He visited old Merwin, the village herbalist, a woman said to commune with spirits and who had always known more than she let on. Her cottage smelled of dried herbs and smoke. "You've been to the hills," she said without looking up. Thomas nodded, wary of the weight of her gaze. "They are restless," she continued, finally meeting his eyes. "The unseelie court rides more frequently. Your presence there has been noticed." Thomas felt the words like a chill wind. "And the changelings?" he asked. "Are the stories true?" Merwin shook her head slowly. "Not all, but enough. A child may be taken to repay a debt or as payment for a trespass. Sometimes they are replaced, yes, with one of their own. But do not imagine you can confront them with anger or force. Iron and salt will protect you only so far. The rest is subtle." Thomas leaned forward, his pulse quickening. "Subtle how?" Merwin gestured to the hearth. "Every bargain is a story, a song, a command whispered in the quiet. The fair folk respect cleverness, timing, and courage. They delight in riddles and truth, but they despise cruelty. The villagers have unknowingly bargained with them for generations. Every crop spared from blight, every child unharmed they have paid with. Attention, respect, and restraint. Fail in one, and the balance tips." The gravity of her words pressed down on Thomas. He understood now that the threat was not always violent or immediate. It was woven into the very fabric of life. Every thoughtless action could draw the gaze of a hidden court. Every insult to the natural order, a potential invitation for calamity. As dusk fell, Thomas left Merwin's cottage, feeling the first real weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He would need to walk carefully, learn the rhythms of both worlds, and interpret the signs of the fair folk. The hills whispered his name, and somewhere in the distance, a faint echo of laughter answered. He could not tell if it was amusement or warning. By the time he returned to his own home, the village was quiet. The windows dark, shadows danced across the walls, and Thomas could not shake the sense of unseen eyes following him. He lit a candle and traced its flickering light across the room, aware that each movement, each word, each breath could matter in ways he had yet to understand. That night, Thomas dreamed of the changeling, its hollow eyes staring at him, and the Queen's warning echoed in his mind. Even the greatest gifts come at a price. He awoke sweating, knowing that the real test had only just begun. To survive and protect the village, he would need more than courage. He would need cunning, patience, and a deep understanding of the bargains that governed the unseen world. The sun had barely risen when Thomas noticed it. A chill had settled over the small cottage at the edge of the village, one that no fire or sunlight could chase away. He had been walking past the homes, observing the villagers, as Merwin had advised, when a faint, unnatural sound stopped him. A child's cry, sharp and piercing, but wrong. It was not the cry of a human infant. It had a hollow cadence, a rhythm that seemed to echo in places it should not. His feet carried him to the grain, source, before he could even think. The door of the cottage was slightly ajar, the latch undone. Inside, the room was dim, the morning light barely touching the cradle. Thomas approached cautiously, the hairs on his neck rising. The baby lay swaddled, but its eyes wide open despite the early hour were what froze him in place. They glimmered with a strange ancient intelligence, too knowing, too aware for one so young. He knelt, careful not to startle it, and felt the pull of something intangible, a weight pressing on his chest. The stories Merwin had whispered to him returned, vivid and terrifying. a changeling. The village had been spared so far, but here it was, staring at him, the first tangible proof that the hidden court had reached beyond the hills. Thomas's mind raced. He could not confront the child with force or anger. That was the folly of generations past, the kind that had ended in the tragic death of Bridget Clearary. No, he needed subtlety, observation, and cunning. He studied the baby, noting every movement, every odd behavior. It refused to suckle properly. Its skin seemed oddly pale, and the tiny hands gripped the edge of the cradle with unnatural strength. He decided to test a simple truth. Reaching into his satchel, Thomas retrieved a small iron knife, cold to the touch. Iron, the oldest of protections, a boundary no fae could easily cross. Placing it near the cradle, he whispered an old rhyme Merwen had taught him, words of caution and binding. The baby recoiled not in fear, exactly, but as though recognizing the power in the metal and the rhyme. Its cry shifted, almost questioning, and for a moment, Thomas glimpsed the creature beneath the infant's flesh, a glimpse of sharp ears, a twisted shadow of a face. He withdrew, heart pounding. This was no ordinary child, and yet he could not strike it down. To act recklessly would invite disaster, not only upon him, but upon the family who loved this stolen soul. He needed guidance, a plan, and perhaps the Queen's wisdom that had gifted him the tongue that could not lie. But even with prophecy on his side, the challenge before him felt insurmountable. The balance between mortal and fae was delicate, and one wrong move could tip it irreversibly. As Thomas stepped back into the street, the village seemed deceptively calm. No one else noticed the subtle unease, the almost imperceptible scent of wildflowers and smoke that lingered in the air, the quiet whispering of wings in the distance. He understood now that the war for the soul of the village had begun not with armies or swords, but with observation, vigilance, and an understanding of bargains older than memory. That night, Thomas wrote in his journal by candlelight, detailing every oddity of the child. His hands shook, not from fear alone, but from the gravity of responsibility pressing down like the hills themselves. The first real sign of the fair folk's intrusion had been revealed, and he knew he would have to walk the shadowed line between two worlds, carefully, patiently, or risk losing everything he sought to protect. Thomas moved quickly through the morning mist, the village streets quiet and empty, as though the world itself had paused to listen. Every step toward Merwen's cottage felt heavier than the last, burdened with the knowledge that the child in the cradle was no ordinary infant. The tales of changelings, once mere stories, had become vivid and urgent warnings in his mind. He needed guidance, and there was only one person who could give it. Merwen's cottage sat at the edge of the forest, hidden beneath a tangle of brambles and ancient oaks. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying a scent of herbs and something wilder, something that hinted at otherworldly origins. Thomas knocked lightly on the door. There was no reply, only the faintest sound of footsteps within. The door creaked open on its own, as if the cottage itself recognized him. Inside, Merwen sat at a table cluttered with jars of herbs, stones engraved with runes, and scraps of parchment filled with cryptic symbols. She looked up, her eyes sharp and knowing, as though she had been expecting him all along. "Thomas," she said, her voice a mixture of warmth and warning, "the veil is thinning, and you have seen what few mortals ever glimpse. Speak quickly what troubles you." Thomas explained everything. The strange cry, the eyes, the unnatural strength, the chill in the air, and the unmistakable aura of the other world clinging to the infant. He described the child's reaction to the iron knife, the fleeting shadow beneath its form, and the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Merwen listened without interruption, her face grave but calm. "This is a changeling," she said at last, her voice low. "A creature of the unseelie court, placed among humans for reasons we cannot fully know. Sometimes it is a debt repaid, sometimes a tithe demanded, and sometimes simply a cruel whim of those who dwell beyond the hills. But make no mistake, Thomas, this is dangerous. To act rashly will bring ruin, not just to you, but to the family who loves this child." She reached into a drawer, and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside were charms of iron, silver, and runes, each etched with spells of protection, binding, and revelation. "These will help," Merwin said, "but they are only tools. The true work must come from your mind and your courage. You must walk carefully. You must speak truth, but you must also listen to the silence. The fair folk are clever. They respect cunning as much as strength." Thomas nodded, feeling both hope and trepidation. "How do I know which path to take?" he asked. Merwin's eyes glinted. "You will know, Thomas. The gift you carry, the tongue that cannot lie, will guide you. But remember, the line between mercy and cruelty is thinner than a spider's hair, and the fair folk will test it." As he left her cottage, the forest seemed to shift around him, shadows deepening and leaves whispering secrets only he could hear. He strapped the charms to his belt and gripped the iron knife in his hand. The village lay ahead, unaware of the silent war that had begun in its midst. Thomas knew he had to prepare, for the forces of the other world were already moving, unseen, around every corner. That night, he returned to the cradle, heart steady, mind sharp. The changeling was there, waiting, eyes gleaming in the firelight. And Thomas, armed with Merwen's counsel and his own relentless will, understood that the first test had only just begun. The moon hung low over the village, casting long skeletal shadows that seemed to stretch across the cobblestones with a mind of their own. Thomas moved quietly through the streets, the iron knife at his side and Merwen's charms clinking softly against his belt. Every sense was alert, every step measured, for he knew that the changeling would not reveal its true nature lightly. Back in the cottage, the infant, its eyes reflecting the silvered light, shifted slightly in its crib, and Thomas felt the familiar shiver of unnatural awareness brush against his skin. This was no ordinary child. Even from across the room, it seemed to study him, gauging his strength, his courage, his knowledge. Thomas knelt beside the crib, placing a protective circle of iron nails around it, just as Merwin had instructed. He whispered words of binding and warning, his tongue tied to truth, the air growing taut with tension. The village outside was still, almost too still. A distant dog barked, a horse neighed, and then nothing. Only the subtle rustle of the wind through the trees, carrying with it a strange scent, sweet, metallic, and utterly alien. Thomas recognized it immediately. The fair folk were near. They were watching. Hours passed. The changeling remained still, though the air seemed to thrum with its latent power. Then, just as the first pale light of dawn crept over the horizon, something shifted. The shadows in the corner of the room deepened unnaturally, stretching toward Thomas as though alive. A faint, whispering laughter echoed softly, brushing the edges of his mind. It was mocking, teasing, familiar in its otherworldly cadence. Thomas held his ground, chanting quietly, repeating Merwin's incantations, feeling the iron knife burn in his hand with cold energy. Slowly, the shadows receded, leaving the changeling in its crib, blinking innocently or as innocently as a being of ancient cunning could. He took a deep breath and inspected the charms around the crib. One of the runes had cracked, hairline fractures forming across the surface, as if the changeling had tested the boundaries of the ward. Thomas's stomach sank. If it could weaken the charms from within, then its power was growing. He would need to act quickly, or the village, and perhaps the child's family, would be in grave danger. Determined, Thomas decided to consult the village records, old accounts of disappearances, unexplained illnesses, and whispered stories of children who changed overnight. The patterns were subtle but undeniable. He traced them to the edges of the surrounding forests, where the fairy mounds lay hidden beneath moss and ivy. The changelings had a network, an invisible web of influence reaching out from their hollow halls, and the infant was only the first node. Night fell again, and Thomas returned to the cottage, exhausted but vigilant. He knelt beside the crib once more, gripping the iron knife. The changeling stirred slightly, and for a fleeting second, Thomas thought it smiled. Then it blinked, and the moment passed. He shivered. He knew now that this was a battle of patience, a test of cunning as much as strength, and the first true trial was only just beginning. Outside, the forest seemed to shift in response to his resolve, the trees leaning as though whispering secrets. Somewhere, deep in the hollows of the hills, a faint light flickered, watching, waiting, and preparing to move. Thomas awoke before dawn, the memory of last night's whispers still clinging to his mind. The changeling lay quietly in the crib, but the sense of being watched had not abated. The iron knife at his side seemed heavier today, charged with an urgency he could not ignore. He had resolved that the next step was no longer observation. He needed to strike at the very source. In the village archives, he uncovered an old, dust-covered ledger, yellowed and fragile with age. The record spoke of children vanishing near the eastern woods, always close to the hillocks the villagers called Hollow Hills. One entry caught his attention, a map, drawn in faded ink, marking a winding, nearly invisible path through the forest that led to a mound labeled Cayley's Rest. Legend claimed it was the entrance to the fairy court, a gateway invisible to mortal eyes unless the heart was open to the old magic. Thomas packed his essentials: iron knife, protective charms, and a small vial of Merwin's sacred water. As he stepped into the forest, the world seemed to shift. Shadows bent unnaturally, the birds fell silent. Every step he took felt heavy, as if the trees themselves were aware of his trespass. Soon, he came upon the path the map described, a narrow trail, almost hidden beneath thick undergrowth. The air here was different. He felt it in his lungs, a subtle hum of energy that made the hair on his arms rise. He followed the trail, noting small signs, a circle of mushrooms forming a perfect ring, the faint scent of wildflowers that smelled too sweet, and a distant melodic laughter that sent a chill down his spine. The map had led him true. Then he saw it, a mound, larger than any natural hill, crowned with moss and ivy. At its base was a small arch, perfectly round, carved from the roots of intertwined oaks. A soft, silver light pulsed from within, beckoning him. Thomas hesitated. He knew that crossing into the fairy court would be dangerous. Unseelie beings did not tolerate mortal intrusion lightly, but he had no choice. The changeling in the village and the safety of countless children depended on it. As he stepped closer, the ground trembled faintly beneath him, and the air seemed to ripple like water disturbed by a stone. A whisper rose from the mound, carrying a language he did not understand but instinctively felt. His iron knife glowed faintly in response, an anchor of protection against the unseen power. Taking a deep breath, Thomas stepped into the archway. The world warped around him. Trees stretched impossibly, the sky turned violet, and the distant hum of the forest transformed into a cacophony of whispered voices. He felt the weight of countless eyes upon him, ancient and knowing. And then he saw them, the Unseelie court, tall, imposing figures with ethereal forms moving like liquid shadow. Their eyes glimmered with ageless intelligence, and their presence was both terrifying and intoxicating. One, taller than the rest, stepped forward. Its gaze met Thomas's, and in that instant, he knew the first test had begun. The battle for the village's children and for his own survival would start here. In the heart of the fairy realm, Thomas's pulse pounded as he stepped fully into the Unseelie court. The air shimmered with a spectral glow, colors shifting like oil on water, and shadows moved with their own intent. The towering figures around him exuded an alien authority, and for a fleeting moment he felt the weight of mortality pressing down like a stone. These were not mere stories. These were the Fae, ancient and relentless, guardians of a world that existed in parallel to his own. The tallest among them, the Queen's lieutenant, he would later come to understand, approached, every step echoing in the silence. Its eyes were like twin moons, cold and radiant, piercing Thomas's soul. Then it spoke, not with words, but with a melody that resonated in his bones. He felt his thoughts bending, memories twisting, as if the very court was probing for weakness. "You enter our realm carrying mortal intentions," the voice hummed. "Your heart is bound to the children of your world. Yet you trespass. What do you offer to balance the scales?" Thomas swallowed, gripping the iron knife in his pocket. "I seek the changelings," he said. "The children who have been taken and replaced. I seek to restore what was stolen." A ripple of laughter rose from the court, sharp and crystalline. "Bravery," the figure said, "or folly, perhaps both. Then you shall face your first trial." Before him, the air twisted. Shapes formed, small, shadowy figures with twisted limbs and infantile faces. The changelings. Their eyes glimmered with unnatural intelligence, and they moved with jerky, unsettling grace. Thomas's skin prickled. One advanced toward him, its mouth opening into a silent scream that seemed to reach inside him, tugging at every buried fear. The court watched. Thomas realized that he could not fight them in the conventional sense. Their power was beyond mortal strength. Instead, he drew upon the gift granted by the Fairy Queen years ago, the tongue that could not lie. Speaking aloud the truth of his purpose, the sorrow and fury he carried, he confronted the creature. "I will not be fooled," Thomas said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. "I know what you are. I know you are not a child, and I will return them to their families." The changeling recoiled, its form flickering. The unseelie court murmured, intrigued. Thomas felt a surge of clarity. The truth he spoke seemed to pierce the veil of illusion. Slowly, the creature began to shrink, its form twisting and condensing into a small, writhing shape. A moment later, it vanished entirely, leaving a faint trail of silver dust behind. The court's attention shifted to him, and the tall figure nodded. "You have passed the first trial, mortal. Your resolve is stronger than most. But know this, the path ahead grows darker. Many will tempt you, deceive you, and test your limits. And not all truths are easily spoken." Thomas exhaled, relief mingling with dread. He had survived the first test. But the unseelie court had made one thing painfully clear. The fairy world was not a place of mercy. Every step forward would demand courage, cunning, and the unwavering strength to confront horrors that defied comprehension. With the first trial behind him, Thomas took his next steps deeper into the heart of the Fae, toward the court's hidden corridors and the secrets that could save or doom the children he sought. Thomas moved cautiously through the twisting corridors of the unseelie court. The walls shimmered with a silvery haze, reflecting not only his own image, but impossible versions of himself, tall, short, old, and young. Every turn seemed to lead back to the same chamber, yet the air carried whispers in countless tongues, some sweet, some hissing, all testing the limits of his sanity. He realized quickly that the court was alive, not merely with fairies, but with the very essence of their power, a fluid, ever-shifting landscape designed to disorient intruders. A misstep could leave a mortal wandering endlessly, lost between illusion and reality, until they became a part of the court itself. Thomas clutched the iron knife at his side and reminded himself of the Queen's warning. Truth was his shield, lies his undoing. Ahead, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A figure, humanoid but small, barely visible through the haze. It tilted its head, regarding him with bright, cunning eyes. "You do not belong here," it whispered, voice like chimes in a storm. "Why have you come?" "I seek the changelings," Thomas replied firmly. "I seek to return the stolen children to their families." The figure laughed softly, a sound that made the walls quiver. "Brave mortal, yet naive. Even among us, not all are what they appear. You must choose carefully whom to trust. Follow blindly, and you may never leave." Thomas's mind raced. He had come this far with only the gift of the tongue that cannot lie and the memory of his mortal life. Could he trust this being? It seemed to radiate truth, yet he felt the subtle pull of danger, a warning buried deep in his instincts. As he debated, the figure stepped closer and extended a tiny hand. In it was a pendant, a delicate silver charm engraved with symbols that pulsed faintly with light. "Take this," it said. "It will protect you from the court's deceptions, but only if you never waver from your purpose." Thomas hesitated. The gift could be a trap, yet he sensed the sincerity behind the gesture. Carefully, he took it, feeling a subtle warmth spread through his chest as the pendant pressed against his heart. Immediately, the illusions around him began to stabilize. The shifting corridors became clearer, and the whispers receded to a distant murmur. "Follow me," the figure said, leading him down a corridor that now seemed tangible. "I will show you a path to the hidden halls, where the most dangerous truths of this realm lie." As they walked, Thomas marveled at the court's duality. Beauty and terror existed side by side. Luminous gardens bloomed beside pools of shadow, and birds with crystal feathers circled around predatory beasts with glowing eyes. Every step reminded him that the Unseelie Court was not simply a place, it was a test of the heart, mind, and soul. Thomas knew the road ahead would demand more than courage. The court would test him, challenge him, and seek to bend him to its will. But for the first time, he felt he had an ally, however fragile, in this alien world. And so, with the pendant warm against his chest and the figure leading the way, Thomas stepped deeper into the labyrinth of the Fae, unaware of the traps and revelations that awaited him in the hidden halls of power. The corridor ended at a massive archway carved from crystal that seemed to hum with energy. Thomas's guide paused, glancing back at him with those bright, cunning eyes. "Beyond this lies knowledge few mortals have ever glimpsed. The halls contain the memories and laws of our kind, and they do not suffer fools lightly." Thomas stepped forward, the pendant warm against his chest. The moment he crossed the threshold, the walls seemed to ripple with life. Etchings of long-forgotten battles, treaties, and the faces of ancient fair folk shimmered and moved as if alive. He realized these halls were not merely archives, they were sentient. Each symbol, each engraving, a fragment of the court's consciousness. "Touch carefully," whispered the guide. "They will reveal themselves only to those who respect the truth." Thomas reached out to a mural depicting a circle of fairies performing a ritual under a blood-red moon. As his fingers brushed the cool surface, a vision surged into his mind. He saw children, their forms shifting between human and fae, trapped in crystal prisms, crying out silently. The realization hit him hard that changelings were real, and they were imprisoned here, preserved by the very magic that governed the court. "Why?" Thomas asked, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "To balance the realms," the guide replied. "Every mortal child taken ensures a measure of power for our world. Those we return are carefully chosen. Those we keep serve a higher purpose you cannot yet comprehend." Thomas felt a surge of anger. They are not currency. They are children. They belong with their families. The guide's gaze softened. "And yet, here you are, mortal, seeking to alter the design of the court. Few dare. Most accept the stories, the myths, and move on. But you are different. Perhaps this is why the Queen granted you the tongue that cannot lie." Thomas's thoughts raced. The responsibility of his gift weighed heavier than ever. The path to rescuing the changelings would be treacherous. Every step forward risked deception. Every misjudgment could condemn another innocent life. The guide led him deeper, past libraries stacked with luminous books that hovered in midair, each one a repository of centuries of magic and history. Some tomes whispered secrets, others screamed warnings that made Thomas's skin crawl. One volume pulsed with a faint blue glow. He knew instinctively it contained the most critical knowledge, the rules for freeing the imprisoned children. "Read carefully," the guide instructed. "The court will watch. If it senses fear, doubt, or deceit, it may never allow you to leave." Thomas opened the book. Symbols swirled before his eyes, rewriting themselves as he focused, translating themselves into a language his mind could understand. The instructions were precise, arcane, and dangerous. Releasing the changelings required more than courage, it demanded sacrifice. He looked to the guide, who nodded. "Once you begin, there is no turning back. The court will challenge everything you hold true. Are you ready?" Thomas clenched the pendant, feeling its warmth steady him. "I have to be. For the children, for the families, for the world that believes the fair folk are only stories. I will not fail." The guide extended its hand, and together they stepped into the chamber where the first imprisoned children awaited, their forms flickering between human innocence and fae distortion. The air grew thick with anticipation and Thomas knew the court would not give up its secrets without a fight. The chamber was vast, larger than any cathedral Thomas had ever seen. Yet the ceiling stretched into shadows that seemed to writhe with intent. In the center, the imprisoned children hovered within crystalline cages, their faces twisted with fear and confusion. Some reached out with trembling hands, calling for parents they could not see. Others were silent, staring with ancient eyes that seemed far too old for their bodies. Thomas swallowed hard. The court's guide whispered, "The first trial begins now. They will judge your intent. They will feel your fear, your doubt, your resolve. The children are tied to the court. They are the key and the gate. Fail, and you may never leave this hall alive." A hush fell across the chamber. Then, from the shadows, figures emerged, tall, pale, regal, with eyes like molten silver. These were the Fae Sentinels, guardians of the imprisoned, their presence radiating authority and menace. One stepped forward, voice resonating like a bell in the vast space. "Mortal," it intoned, "you claim to seek justice for our wards. Yet, do you truly understand the balance of worlds you would disrupt?" Thomas felt the weight of every story he had heard, every myth he had studied, pressing down on him. "I seek only to return what was stolen," he said, voice steady despite the fear curling in his stomach. "The children belong in their homes, with their families. No power, no bargain, no tradition justifies keeping them here." The Fae's eyes narrowed. The air thickened, pulsing with energy that made Thomas's ears ring. Words are simple. Actions are costly. Without warning, the crystalline cages around the children shimmered and vanished, leaving the children suspended in midair. A powerful wind swept through the chamber, threatening to tear Thomas from his feet. Each child's gaze met his, searching for courage, for hope, for a savior. And Thomas knew this was more than a test of words, it was a test of heart. He raised his hand, the pendant burning against his chest, and began to speak. Not just words, but the truth of his soul, the promise of his intent. "I swear on my life, on this gift, that I will not fail you. I will protect you, guide you, and return you to your world. You are not prisoners, you are children, and you will be free." A low hum spread through the hall. Shadows twisted, then pulled back, revealing a path of light leading toward the far exit. The Fae Sentinels remained, but their posture softened. One nodded once, imperceptibly. "You have passed the first trial, mortal, but the path ahead is not free of peril. For every child freed, a choice must be made. The court watches, and the cost of misstep is more than you can imagine." Thomas exhaled, sweat streaming down his face. The children floated closer, faces filled with cautious hope. He could see the flicker of their original humanity, but he also saw the lingering marks of the court's influence, the unnatural resilience that set them apart. He bent to one small boy, whose eyes were wide with terror. "We will get you home," he whispered. The boy blinked, uncertain, but nodded ever so slightly. Thomas knew that the moment of courage had been shared. The first step had been taken. Yet, as he looked back at the shimmering exit, Thomas felt the shadow of the court looming behind him. The trials were only beginning, and the true cost of freeing the changelings had yet to be revealed. Thomas stepped onto the path of light, the children trailing hesitantly behind him. Each step sent shivers up his spine. The air seemed charged, alive with a watchful presence. He could feel the Fae Sentinel's gaze pressing into his back, measuring his courage, his intent. This was no ordinary journey. It was a gauntlet, a test not only of skill but of heart and sacrifice. The first child, a pale girl with hair like spun silver, reached for Thomas's hand. "Will it hurt?" she whispered, voice trembling. Her words made his chest tighten. He knew the truth. Freedom demanded a price. The Fae did not give back what they had stolen lightly. Every act of restitution came with consequence. Ahead, the path split into 3 shimmering arches, each radiating a different color of light. A voice echoed through the chamber, melodic and chilling. "Choose wisely, mortal. One path leads to freedom, one to torment, one to loss beyond measure." Only your heart may guide you." Thomas hesitated. He remembered the stories, the tales of mortals who had bargained with the Fae and failed. Some had returned empty-handed. Others had lost their sanity, their lives, or worse, the children had not survived the trials. He could not afford to fail. The silver-haired girl tugged at his sleeve. "I want to go with you," she said firmly. Thomas nodded, gripping her hand. As he stepped toward the central arch, a surge of wind threw them both backward. Shadows coiled around their feet, whispering threats and promises of power. "To pass," the voice intoned, "a mortal must offer what he holds most dear." Thomas froze. He thought of his family long gone, and the small pendant that hung around his neck, the only remnant of his lost father. The pendant had protected him, guided him, and now it pulsed with a heat that warned of the impending choice. With a deep breath, Thomas unclasped the pendant and held it aloft. "If this is the price, then take it," he said, voice steady though his hands shook. The air rippled, shadows recoiled. The Fae's laughter echoed a sound like glass breaking and bells ringing at once. The path of light solidified, the shimmering arches narrowing into a single corridor. The children looked at him with awe and tentative relief. The first step had been made. But Thomas knew this was only the beginning. The pendant's warmth left his chest hollow, and he could feel a strange emptiness growing inside. The court's lesson was clear. Nothing could be gained without cost. The Fae demanded balance, and balance required sacrifice. As he led the children forward, the shadows seemed to shift, taking new forms, twisted mockeries of what he loved, reminding him that the trials were far from over. Each child's freedom would be earned through courage, wit, and unflinching resolve. Thomas whispered to the silver-haired girl, "Stay close. Do not let fear guide you. The court will test every ounce of your spirit." She nodded, small fingers clutching his hand like a lifeline. Beyond the corridor, a faint glow promised the next challenge. And Thomas knew, deep in his bones, that for every victory he won here, a greater peril awaited. The court's games had only begun, and the price of freedom was far steeper than he had imagined. The corridor opened onto a vast forest, its trees impossibly tall, their canopies blotting out the sun. The air shimmered with a strange green light, and a low hum pulsed through the ground like the heartbeat of the woods itself. Thomas felt it immediately. This was no ordinary forest. It was alive in every sense, aware of his presence, measuring his thoughts, his fears, his intent. The children clung to his sides, their eyes wide with awe and terror. Leaves rustled, though no wind stirred. Shadows shifted unnaturally, forming shapes that seemed to leer, whispering the secrets of their minds aloud. "Do not listen," Thomas warned, his voice low. "The forest will try to trick us. It feeds on doubt." A path opened before them, lined with roots that twisted like serpents and glimmering mushrooms that pulsed like living lanterns. As they stepped forward, the forest reacted, the trees bending inward, their bark forming grotesque faces. One massive oak groaned, its voice deep and slow. "Mortal, why do you trespass in our realm?" Thomas swallowed hard. "We seek only passage," he replied, keeping his tone respectful. The forest murmured among itself, a language older than memory. The faces twisted in anger, then curiosity. Thomas realized they were testing him not physically, but morally and mentally. Every choice, every hesitation would be observed. Suddenly, the forest floor split open, revealing a back, mirror-like pool of black water. From its depths, reflections of Thomas and the children rose, but not as they were. Each figure was distorted, twisted by their deepest fears. The silver-haired girl stared in horror as her reflection aged decades in an instant, her tiny face lined and grim. "Do not look too long," Thomas warned. He could feel the pull of the water, its seductive promise. Step in, and you could escape the trials. But he knew the truth. The forest offered nothing but illusions, traps for the unwary. He reached out, taking the girl's hand and leading her forward, speaking calmly. "We are not these fears. We are ourselves. Remember that." The children nodded, trembling, gripping each other for support. The forest roared, shaking the ground beneath them, leaves snapping like brittle bones. As they pressed on, Thomas noticed subtle changes. The trees whispered guidance, pointing the way to safer paths, rewarding courage and clarity of heart. It was a delicate balance. Step wrongly, and the forest would twist reality against them. Act with resolve, and the forest reluctantly parted, revealing the path forward. Hours seemed to pass in moments. Time here was slippery, elastic, bending to the will of the sentient woods. Finally, they emerged from the forest into a clearing, the oppressive green light fading, replaced by the cool, welcoming glow of moonlight. The children exhaled in relief, but Thomas knew better. The forest had granted them passage, but it had not forgiven them. Every choice mattered. Every fear was a weapon the Fae could wield. Ahead, a new challenge awaited, something even older, darker, and more cunning than the forest. The Trickster's Marsh, a place where deception was law, and reality could shift at a whim. The clearing ended abruptly at the edge of the marsh, a vast expanse of dark water dotted with twisted reeds and thick, churning fog. The air smelled of decay and damp earth, and the surface of the water reflected the moon like a shattered mirror. Thomas paused, sensing immediately that this place was alive in a different way than the forest, cunning, mischievous, cruel. "Stay close," he whispered to the children. Each step squelched into mud, and the ground seemed to shift beneath their feet, creating paths that vanished as soon as they were crossed. Mist curled around them, forming phantom shapes, laughing faces, hands reaching out, shadows that flickered and vanished. Every glance was a threat, every whisper a trap. A figure appeared across the water, leaning against a jagged rock. It was tall and impossibly thin, its features sharp and shifting like smoke. Its eyes glimmered with amusement. "Welcome, travelers," it said, its voice echoing, though no mouth moved. "You seek the path forward. Yes, but the marsh does not give freely. You must earn it with wit and courage." Thomas tightened his grip on the children's hands. "We don't wish to fight. We only wish to pass." The trickster laughed, a sound like cracking ice and broken bells. "Ah, but everything here is a riddle. Every choice a puzzle. Even your very senses will betray you." Immediately, the marsh began to change. Paths appeared and disappeared, reeds bending to block the way, pools reflecting not the moon but images from their past, failures, fears, moments they wished had gone differently. The children's faces mirrored their panic. Thomas could feel the marsh probing for weaknesses, feeding on doubt. He knelt, closing his eyes, and whispered, "Do not trust your eyes, trust your hearts." Slowly, step by step, he guided the children, ignoring the illusions. When a pool showed him as a monstrous shadow of himself, he spoke aloud, "I am Thomas, and this is my path." The reflection quivered and shattered, leaving only still water behind. Hours or maybe minutes passed in this dreamlike nightmare. The marsh tried every trick. Echoes of laughter, the cries of imaginary children, shapes of creatures Thomas could not name. Each test was more cunning than the last, designed to force them to turn back or give in to despair. At the heart of the marsh, they came to a small island of solid ground. The trickster hovered nearby, its grin widening. "You have endured well. Few ever do. Take what you have learned here and step forward. But remember, the marsh forgets nothing, and it will watch." As Thomas led the children across the last muddy stretch, he realized that the marsh had changed them. Their fears had been confronted, illusions shattered, and the seeds of courage planted. But the trickster's warning lingered in his mind. This journey was far from over. Greater dangers, older and more merciless, awaited them beyond the horizon. The children's tiny hands squeezed his, and Thomas whispered, "We keep moving, one step at a time. That is all we can do." They emerged from the fog into a new, eerily silent landscape, the Valley of Whispering Stones. There, the air hummed with forgotten spells, and the very rocks seemed to murmur secrets to each other. The valley stretched before them like a frozen sea of gray. Monolithic stones jutted from the earth at impossible angles, their surfaces etched with ancient runes that seemed to crawl when glanced at from the corner of the eye. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through Thomas's bones, and he realized the sound wasn't coming from the wind, it was the stones themselves, whispering secrets in a language older than memory. The children clung to his sides, shivering not from cold, but from the uncanny energy that radiated from the stones. Every step they took seemed to stir faint murmurs, echoes of voices that had long since vanished from the world. Some sounded like laughter, others like sorrowful weeping, and all carried a weight that made the heart ache. "There is something alive here," whispered Thomas, more to himself than anyone else. Not like the marsh, not like the Fae, but something that remembers, something that sees. He traced a finger over the nearest stone, feeling grooves that were smooth yet sharp, deliberate yet chaotic. The runes glimmered faintly, responding to his touch, and a voice not human, not quite fairy, spoke directly into his mind. "Why have you come?" Thomas swallowed. "We seek the path to the High Court," he answered, the words echoing in his skull. "We must understand. We must survive." The stone shivered, a ripple passing through the row of monoliths. "Knowledge has a cost. Are you willing to pay it?" The children shivered and looked up at him. Thomas felt the same chill that had haunted him in the marsh, the sensation that the valley could peer inside their souls and know every secret, every hidden fear. Yet he nodded, stepping further into the sea of stones. The whispers grew louder, shifting into discernible words, warnings of betrayal, the toll of time, the hunger of powers unseen. Thomas realized that the stones were alive not in the way creatures were, but as vessels of memory, capturing the echoes of every visitor, every trespasser, every soul who had ever dared enter. A narrow path opened between the stones, lined with runes that glowed faintly like embers. They followed it cautiously, every step resonating with a soft hum that seemed to vibrate directly in their hearts. At the center of the valley, the path ended at a vast stone circle. In the middle stood a pedestal, carved from black rock, inscribed with a single rune that pulsed like a heartbeat. Thomas approached, the children close behind. As he reached out to touch it, the whispers became a roar, filling his mind with visions. Fleeting glimpses of the Fae courts, of battles fought in shadows, of bargains made in blood and fire, and of a future he could not yet fully grasp. One vision burned brighter than the rest, a door framed by moonlight, behind which a figure waited, patient and eternal. The whispers fell silent, leaving only a single undeniable truth. The next step in their journey would demand sacrifice, cunning, and courage beyond anything they had yet faced. Thomas took a deep breath. "We move forward," he said, more to himself than the children. "No matter what waits for us." The stones hummed once more, as if acknowledging their resolve. And then the path beyond the circle began to shimmer, a gateway into the unknown, leading to the very heart of the Fae. Beyond the shimmering gateway, the forest opened into a realm that defied mortal logic. The trees were impossibly tall, their silver leaves shimmering like starlight, and the air was thick with the perfume of flowers that did not exist anywhere else in the world. Colors shifted subtly, bending reality, and shadows moved with an intelligence of their own. Thomas's heart pounded. This was no mere forest, it was the threshold of the High Court, the very seat of the Fae's power. The children clung to his hands, their small faces pale but resolute. "Do you think they'll be nice?" one whispered. Thomas shook his head. "Nice is not a word they understand," he replied. "Only fair, only bound by rules we cannot always comprehend." A sudden rustle made them freeze. From the underbrush emerged figures clothed in garments woven from moonlight and mist. They were tall, impossibly graceful, their eyes glinting with an ageless intelligence. The guardians of the High Court, Thomas realized. They spoke not with voices, but with thoughts that brushed against his mind, like a cold wind. "State your purpose, mortal." Thomas swallowed, feeling the weight of every misstep that had brought him here. "We seek the counsel of the High Court," he answered, projecting confidence he did not feel. "We seek understanding and safe passage for those who travel with me." The guardians circled, their movements fluid, silent, like dancers in a ritual older than memory. One stepped forward, its face both beautiful and terrible, shifting like a reflection in rippling water. "Many come seeking knowledge," it said, its voice a melody threaded with steel. "Few are ready to bear it, and fewer still leave unchanged." Thomas nodded. "We are ready to pay the cost," he said, remembering the whispers of the Valley of Stones. "We accept the trials." The guardian studied him, its eyes piercing, reading deeper than thought. After a long moment, it inclined its head. The air trembled, and the forest floor parted to reveal a path lined with thorns of crystalline silver. The path led upward, twisting like a spiral staircase to a plateau where the High Court gathered. As they ascended, Thomas felt the weight of centuries pressing down. Whispers of old bargains and ancient betrayals filled his mind. He glimpsed phantoms of mortals who had once dared this journey, some triumphant, others broken, some vanished entirely. The children tightened their grips on his hands, and he could feel their fear mingling with his own. At the summit, the High Court awaited. Figures of every imaginable form, tall, winged, shifting, radiant, grotesque, stood in a perfect circle. The tallest, crowned with living vines and jeweled thorns, turned toward them. Its eyes burned with knowledge and judgment. "Mortal," it intoned, "you enter our domain. Speak your truth and let the trials begin." Thomas took a deep breath, feeling the full weight of the Fae's gaze. Every fiber of his being knew that nothing after this would be the same. The High Court had awaited him, and now he had no choice but to step forward into their unknowable power. The air in the High Court was heavy, with a silence that pressed against Thomas's chest. Every creature within the circle of light seemed to observe not just his body, but his very soul. The crown of living vines atop the tallest figure shimmered with an unearthly glow. Its voice echoed in the minds of all present. "To walk in our world is to confront what is hidden. Your first trial begins." Before Thomas could ask what it meant, shadows poured from the edges of the plateau. They were not ordinary darkness. They had form, writhing like smoke yet solid, whispering his deepest fears. Each shadow carried a voice from Thomas's past, twisted with accusation and doubt. "You abandoned them. You were unworthy. You will fail." The children gasped, but Thomas clenched his jaw. He had faced impossible journeys before, but nothing like this. The shadows coiled around his feet, tugging, beckoning him to surrender. One by one, they assumed the faces of those he loved most: his mother, his sister, even the queen who had given him the gift of prophecy. Their eyes held silent pleas, but in the distorted light of the High Court, he could see that their expressions were not real. They were twisted mirrors, reflections of his own guilt and fear. A cold voice pierced through the whispers. "Speak your truth, mortal. Only the honest heart can pass." Thomas closed his eyes and remembered the lessons from his journeys. He remembered the changelings, the bargains, the forests that did not forgive. He remembered the loss of time, the sacrifice of his own life, the weight of prophecy. Slowly, he spoke not to the shadows, but to himself, aloud and unflinching. "I am afraid. I have failed. I have lost what I cannot regain. And yet, I walk forward because I must. I accept my fears, and I will not let them control me." The shadows hesitated. Their writhing slowed, their faces flickered, and for a brief moment, Thomas felt the cold, intelligent eyes of the High Court upon him. He opened his eyes to see the crown of vines quivering, as if acknowledging his courage. Then, in a sudden motion, the shadows withdrew, melting into the air like mist before dawn. Silence returned. The court watched, unblinking, as Thomas extended his hand to the children, who clung to him even tighter. The trial had not broken them. The tallest figure stepped forward again, its vines shifting to form a gesture of both warning and respect. You have faced the first test. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. Remember this, for trials yet greater await. The High Court does not judge by intention alone, but by action and heart. A path opened before them, deeper into the court, lined with floating lights that pulsed like living hearts. Thomas knew the next trial would demand more than courage. It would demand cunning, wisdom, and perhaps even betrayal. But for now, he allowed himself a brief moment of relief. They had survived the trial of shadows. As they stepped forward, he whispered to the children, "Stay close. The court does not forgive the lost." And with that, the second gate of the High Court swung open, revealing a darkness more intricate than the first, promising tests that would reach into their very minds and souls. The air grew colder as Thomas and the children stepped through the second gate of the High Court. Mist curled along the stone floor, and the light from the floating orbs dimmed into faint, trembling glimmers. A mirror appeared before them, larger than any door, stretching impossibly high. Its surface shimmered like liquid silver, reflecting not their outward forms, but visions of what they most desired or feared. Thomas froze, recognizing immediately the trap. The High Court did not tempt with trivialities. They tempted with truth, the raw, unspoken yearnings of the heart. In the mirror, he saw a world where the years stolen by the Fae were restored. He saw the Queen smiling at him, her hand reaching out as if to welcome him back into the hollow hills. He saw his family, safe and unscarred, the weight of prophecy lifted from his shoulders. The allure was intoxicating. The children reacted differently. One of the twins, a girl, screamed at her reflection, which showed her parents alive, rich, and smiling, a reality that had been taken from her in the mortal world. Her brother staggered back, staring as his reflection morphed into a scene of himself as a fearless warrior, untouchable and adored. Thomas knew what the court demanded. To touch the mirror was to surrender to illusion, to lose oneself to desire. To look away was to face pain, loss, and disappointment, the very things that forged courage. He took a deep breath and spoke aloud, steadying himself and the children. "We see what we wish, not what is. These visions are lies. We take only what is ours to hold." The mirror pulsed, rippling like water. Shadows emerged from its depths, tendrils reaching toward their hearts, tugging at their minds. Every longing, every secret regret, every fragment of envy and resentment surged forward. Thomas felt the tug of the hollow hills, the pull of the Queen's promise, the soft whispers of a life unburdened by prophecy. His hands shook, but he forced himself to step back, dragging the children with him. A voice, neither male nor female, echoed in the chamber. "Most fail here. Few know that to reject desire is not weakness, but the strength to endure reality." The mirror cracked, shattering like ice underfoot. From its fragments, the illusions bled away, leaving only reflections true to their present forms, scarred, frightened, human, yet unbroken. Thomas looked at the children. Their eyes were wide but clear, their courage hardened by recognition. The court remained silent, but the pulsing lights grew brighter. A gate opened ahead, this one adorned with twisting iron and etched with symbols of flame and shadow. Thomas sensed that the next trial would demand not just courage or wisdom, but endurance. The trial of reflection had tested their hearts, revealing that desire could be a trap more dangerous than any shadow or blade. Thomas whispered to the children, "The court offers dreams, but reality is our armor. Keep your heart steady. What comes next will challenge everything we've learned." They stepped forward, leaving the broken mirror behind. In the distance, the faint sound of dripping water hinted at the approach of their next trial, the trial of fire. The gate ahead swung open with a groan that echoed through the cavernous hall. Beyond it lay a corridor bathed in crimson light, walls seeming to shimmer with molten veins. The air burned with an unnatural heat, carrying the scent of sulfur and charred stone. Thomas stepped forward cautiously, the children clutching his hands, their eyes wide as the first flickers of flames danced along the walls. "This is no ordinary fire," Thomas whispered. The court does not punish with simple flame. This tests our endurance, our ability to face pain without surrendering to fear. The floor beneath their feet was solid, yet heat radiated upward, and the walls seemed to pulse in rhythm with their own heartbeats. Ahead, shadowy figures emerged from the flames, specters of those they had lost, mistakes they had made, and moments of shame long buried. Each apparition carried the scent and heat of the fire, their eyes glowing with a cold, judging light. Thomas felt the heat pressing against his skin, his robe scorching almost instantly. The children stumbled, their small bodies trembling under the oppressive heat. He pulled them close, guiding them through the first stretch. The fire did not burn in the ordinary sense. It burned illusions, preying on weaknesses. To falter, to scream, was to risk becoming part of the court's spectacle. A voice, deep and resonant, filled the hall. The fire shows what you fear most. Endure or be consumed. Thomas watched as a vision of the queen appeared in the flames, her eyes pleading, promising safety if he would only kneel and offer obedience. He gritted his teeth, remembering the last trial. Desire was a trap, fear was another. His task was not to fight what the flames projected, but to walk through them without succumbing. The children cried out as fiery images of their past pains rose around them. Thomas shouted above the roar, "Remember who you are, this is illusion, keep moving." Their hands tightened his, they pressed forward, step by step, feeling the heat licking their ankles, their arms, yet never actually burning. Courage, Thomas realized, was not the absence of fear, it was action in spite of it. Halfway through, the corridor narrowed, the fire intensifying into a tunnel of white-hot brilliance. Every step was agony, each breath a struggle. But Thomas reminded himself of the gift the Fairy Queen had given him, the tongue of truth, the clarity to see illusions as illusions. He spoke aloud, naming the apparitions. "You are not real. You have no power over me." Slowly, the flames began to recede. Shadows dissolved, leaving the heat lingering but fading. At the end of the corridor, a massive iron door awaited, untouched by the fire, glowing faintly with symbols of endurance and patience. Thomas and the children, sweat-soaked and trembling, stepped forward. "This trial was not about fire alone," Thomas said, voice rasping. "It was about facing pain, fear, and temptation, and walking forward anyway. Only those who endure can hope to meet what lies beyond." The door creaked open, revealing a dark chamber where whispers of wind promised both danger and revelation. Ahead lay the trial of shadows, the next challenge of the High Court, where unseen forces would confront them in forms most familiar and most feared. The chamber beyond the iron door was vast, its ceilings lost in darkness, and its walls absorbing the faint light like liquid. A silence hung heavy in the air, pressing against Thomas and the children. A silence so deep it seemed to echo their own thoughts back at them. "This is the trial of shadows," Thomas whispered, feeling the weight of the unseen eyes that surely watched them. Here, the court tests the soul itself, using your memories, fears, and hidden truths as weapons. The children clung to him instinctively, and he felt the tremor of their small hands. Shadows stirred along the walls, curling into shapes both familiar and distorted. The air thickened with the scent of damp earth, decay, and the faintest trace of burned candle wax. Thomas's stomach churned, his mind racing to steady both himself and the children. Suddenly, the shadows twisted, forming figures from their pasts. Faces of loved ones, some lost, some distant, floated before them. Their voices whispered accusations, regrets, and promises of despair. "You've failed me," hissed one. "You should have protected us," murmured another. Thomas felt the weight of every choice he had made, every moment he had faltered, compressing his chest like stone. He knew the court fed on doubt, magnifying guilt and fear. To succumb would mean endless torment, being trapped in the shadow world until his soul itself eroded. Thomas gritted his teeth, taking a deep breath. He focused on the gift the Fairy Queen had given him, the tongue of truth. He whispered aloud, naming each apparition for what it truly was: a shadow, a memory, a trick of the court. The shadows recoiled, twisting and reforming, now more erratic, more desperate. Then the shadows began to merge, taking the shape of Thomas himself, but older, twisted, and cruel. "This is what you fear most," a voice echoed. "Your own failure, your own corruption." Thomas felt the pull, the urge to shrink, to kneel, to dissolve into the darkness. But he stood firm. "I am not this," he said aloud. "I am still me. I am still the man who loves, protects, and endures. You have no power over who I choose to be." A wind rose from the center of the chamber, a force unseen yet tangible. It spiraled around the shadows, stripping them of shape, light, and menace. The whispers became incoherent, then ceased entirely. The darkness receded, revealing a faint path lined with silver stones, leading toward a rising glow at the far end. Thomas exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow, and lifted the children into a run toward the path. Each step felt lighter, as if the trial had purged something from their souls. The glow ahead was soft, almost warm, a promise that the end of the shadow trial was near. Before they reached it, Thomas paused. He knew this was only one step among many, a warning that even when darkness recedes, it leaves marks, lessons learned, scars earned, and vigilance demanded. The court would not relent, but he also knew that endurance, courage, and clarity could carve a path forward even through the deepest shadow. The next chamber awaited a test not of fire, not of illusion, but of time itself. The moment Thomas stepped through the silver-lit archway, a peculiar heaviness pressed against him, as if the air itself had thickened into liquid. The children clung to him instinctively, their small faces pale and tight with fear. The chamber stretched endlessly in all directions, yet the walls shimmered with a strange fluidity, as though reality itself were bending and folding. A low hum vibrated through the floor, resonating deep in the chest, a sound that seemed to come from the bones of the earth. "This is the trial of time," a disembodied voice murmured, echoing from every direction. "Here, the moments you have lost, the years you have wasted, and the memories you have forsaken are laid bare. The past is both weapon and prisoner. To falter is to be consumed." Immediately, Thomas felt the pull of his own timeline stretching like taffy. Scenes from his past unfolded around him. The morning he first met the Fairy Queen, the night spent in agonizing worry over the children, and moments he had tried to forget, failures, betrayals, and words spoken too late. Each memory flickered and distorted, replaying, mistakes in grotesque detail. "Time is a mirror," the voice continued, "and a cage. Here, even the smallest misstep can expand into eternity." The children cried out softly as the images around them shifted. Their laughter became wails. Their safe moments became perilous traps. Thomas realized that the court was bending his perception, compressing 7 years into an endless, looping moment. He gritted his teeth, grounding himself. The gift of truth, the Fairy Queen's tongue, was more than a shield. It was a tether to reality. Thomas whispered aloud, naming each distorted memory for what it was: a shadow of regret, a lie of fear, a trick of perception. With each declaration, the images wavered, losing clarity and coherence, their grip on the children loosening. Then came the cruelest vision: the children, grown into strangers, their eyes hollow, blaming him for abandoning them. Thomas's chest tightened as despair clawed at him, but he forced a calm voice. "I will not let illusions rewrite what is real," he said firmly. "You are still here. We are still together." The floor beneath them rippled like liquid silver, lifting the children and Thomas gently, carrying them forward as the distorted visions receded. The air grew warmer, the weight of time less oppressive. The hum faded into silence, leaving only the faint ticking of unseen clocks. At the far end of the chamber, a doorway glowed with a golden light, promising release from the trial of time. Thomas looked back once, seeing only shadows of what could have been, not what was. Every trial left its mark, but he understood now that fear and regret could be acknowledged, named, and left behind without succumbing to them. The golden door beckoned, and Thomas stepped forward, children in hand. Beyond it awaited the trial of elements, a confrontation with fire, water, wind, and earth, where the court would test their endurance against the raw forces of nature itself. The golden door closed behind Thomas with a sound like rolling thunder, and the air shifted instantly. He felt the pulse of unseen forces, each one demanding attention, obedience, and respect. The children clung to him, their small hands trembling, as the chamber dissolved into a vast wilderness. The ground beneath them was rough and uneven, half rocky, half covered in thick, wet moss that clung to their shoes. A voice, deeper now, and layered with the sounds of wind, water, fire, and stone, resonated around them. To pass, you must endure, adapt, and survive. Each element tests the strength of body, heart, and mind. Fail, and you remain forever within their domain. Without warning, a torrent of wind struck from every direction, howling like a chorus of angry spirits. Thomas shielded the children, crouching low as debris whipped past them, stinging skin and tearing at clothing. He shouted words of encouragement, his voice firm, steady, and truthful words imbued with the gift of the Fairy Queen. The wind's fury tested their courage, trying to separate them, to erode their will. When the gusts abated, Thomas realized that the trial had only begun. Waters surged next, flooding the uneven ground with sudden, icy currents. The children shrieked as the waves rose higher, threatening to sweep them away. Thomas anchored himself against a jagged boulder, lifting each child, guiding them through the peril. He noticed that the water responded to fear. If he panicked, the currents rose, but calm resolve caused the waves to retreat. No sooner had they crossed the water than fire erupted in jagged streaks from the ground, scorching earth and rock. Flames leapt unnaturally high, twisting with a sentience that seemed almost alive. Thomas rolled his coat into a makeshift shield and forced the children to move with deliberate steps, avoiding the arcs of fire. He realized that the element tested focus. A distracted mind or an uncontrolled emotion would invite destruction. Finally, the earth itself roared. The ground buckled, splitting beneath their feet, tossing them into chasms that seemed to appear and disappear at will. Thomas held on to the children, jumping across shifting plates of stone, feeling the very bones of the world tremble with ancient power. He understood that the trial was not merely about physical endurance. It demanded harmony with the forces around them, a communion with the raw, untamed energy of the natural world. When the earth stilled, the wind calmed, the water receded, and the fire extinguished, a hush fell over the wilderness. Thomas looked at the children. Their eyes reflected exhaustion and awe. The chamber, once chaotic, now shimmered with a quiet golden light. They had endured. They had adapted. They had survived. Ahead, a set of silver arches appeared, glowing with a pale spectral light. The trial of elements had tested the limits of body, mind, and heart, but the path forward promised deeper challenges, battles with shadows of their own fears, encounters with illusions designed to unravel their trust, and confrontations with entities older than memory itself. Thomas straightened, feeling the weight of responsibility and the pulse of power the Fairy Queen had gifted him. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The silver arches faded behind them, replaced by a twisting corridor of darkness. Shadows stretched like living things, bending and twisting at angles that made the mind reel. The air was thick and heavy, carrying the scent of damp earth and a faint metallic tang that set Thomas's teeth on edge. Every step forward felt as though the walls themselves were watching, shifting imperceptibly to trap, confuse, and disorient. "This is the labyrinth of shadows," a whisper echoed, seeming to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Here, your fears take shape. Only by seeing clearly can you pass." The children huddled close, their small hands gripping Thomas's coat. Immediately, the darkness around them responded. Figures emerged, tall and indistinct, faces blurred but filled with malevolence. Their eyes glimmered like coals, and their movements were unnervingly human, yet impossibly twisted. One by one, they mirrored the deepest worries of the travelers. Thomas's heart thumped, but he remembered the Queen's gift, truth. His tongue could not lie, and his courage must be genuine. "You are shadows," he said aloud, his voice ringing with conviction. "You are nothing but fear made visible. You have no power over us." The shadows hissed and recoiled, their forms writhing, but they did not vanish. Instead, they multiplied, each more terrifying than the last. One figure stepped forward, a dark version of Thomas himself, eyes black voids, teeth bared in a silent scream. The children froze, recognizing the threat. "Father?" one whispered. Thomas took a deep breath. "No," he said firmly. "I am me. My fear is mine to face, not to run from." He raised his hands, not to strike, but to stand resolute. The dark Thomas lunged, and suddenly, Thomas felt a pull, a tug at his mind and heart. He recognized the shadow for what it was, his own doubt amplified into flesh. "I see you," he said, steadying himself. "I will not be undone by my own fear." The shadow wavered, flickering like smoke in wind. Slowly, it began to dissolve, leaving only the memory of a terror conquered. Around them, the other shadows paused. Thomas guided the children forward, speaking truth and courage as a shield. Each fear they named, each terror they acknowledged and rejected. The labyrinth's walls grew lighter, the oppressive air thinning. Shadows that had whispered threats now dissipated into mist, revealing glimpses of silver pathways beyond. Finally, they reached a circular chamber at the heart of the labyrinth. In its center floated a single black flame, cold and flickering. The whisper returned, harsher now. "The shadows bow to the truth they cannot deny, yet the darkness within is eternal. Remember this lesson, mortal. Fear is a companion, not an enemy. Respect it, but do not surrender to it." Thomas touched the flame with reverence, feeling its icy fire burn without harm. The labyrinth shifted again, opening a tunnel of gleaming light. Ahead lay the next trial, promised to be more complex and deceptive, the mirror hall, where reality itself would be questioned. He took the children's hands, the shadows fading behind them, and stepped forward into the uncertain brilliance. The light ahead of them was not the warm glow of safety, but a gleaming crystalline corridor that shimmered like liquid silver. Every surface reflected and refracted, doubling and tripling their images until they seemed to walk inside 1,000 worlds at once. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. The mirror hall was said to reveal not only what one was, but what one feared and desired most, and it would trap the unwary in its endless reflections. "Stay close," Thomas whispered to the children, his eyes scanning the ever-shifting surfaces. The first reflection they encountered was of themselves, but not quite right. Thomas's face was lined with years he hadn't yet lived. The children appeared as older, wiser, and yet sorrowful versions of themselves. Their eyes, though familiar, held secrets and knowledge they had not yet earned. As they moved forward, the mirrors began to multiply possibilities. Every choice they imagined splintered into 1,000 doors, each leading to a different future. The air was filled with faint laughter echoes of potential selves, whispering promises, threats, and enticements. One reflection stepped forward from the glass, Thomas's own form, but with eyes cold and calculating. "You will never escape," it said, its voice a distorted echo of his own. "Every path you take leads to failure. You cannot save them." Thomas gritted his teeth. "I may not know the outcome," he admitted, "but I know my purpose. You are nothing but a shadow of doubt." He struck the glass, and the reflection shattered, its pieces floating around them like silver shards. For a moment, he felt a tug of despair, but the Queen's gift reminded him, truth, always. The children faced their own reflections. One saw herself shrinking, disappearing, her voice silent in the hall. Another saw a brother lost to darkness, wandering alone. Thomas held their hands firmly. "These are illusions," he said. "Not reality. Do not believe them. We are together. That is what is real," the mirrors responded. Some cracked, some melted into pools of reflective liquid, and some warped to show possibilities that were neither terrifying nor comforting, just strange, foreign, and unknowable. The hall tested more than fear. It tested resilience, discernment, and faith in what one knows to be true. At the center of the mirror hall, they found a pedestal holding a single, flawless crystal. Its surface shimmered with all the reflections of the hall, as if containing every possibility, every fear, every desire simultaneously. The whisper returned, gentler now. Take this, and the next passage will reveal itself. But remember, to hold the crystal is to see all paths at once. Only one is the path of truth. Choose wisely. Thomas reached for it, feeling a surge of knowledge and anxiety. Every choice they had ever made, every outcome imaginable, surged in his mind. He closed his eyes, grounding himself with the Queen's gift of truth. When he opened them, he saw the way forward, a narrow corridor that shimmered with golden light, simple and unassuming. With the children following, he stepped forward. The mirrors behind them folded into nothingness, leaving no trace of the labyrinth they had passed through. But the lessons of reflection lingered. Truth is not what one sees, but what one believes and protects. Ahead lay the trial of echoes, a test of leaven-wreathed memory, voice, and the voices of the lost. The corridor narrowed into a cavernous space, its walls humming with a faint, vibrating resonance. The air was thick, carrying whispers of voices, some familiar, some alien, and all layered together in a haunting symphony. Thomas instinctively pulled the children close. "This is the trial of echoes," he said quietly. "Every sound here will test our memories, our fears, even our courage." As they stepped forward, the whispers began to solidify into words. The first voice was soft, almost pleading. "Thomas, Thomas, you left me." It was the voice of a figure from his past, a memory of someone he had failed, a promise broken. His chest tightened, but he forced himself to listen calmly. "I will not be deceived," he murmured. "These are echoes, not reality." The cavern responded, multiplying the voices, layering them in dizzying cacophony. The children flinched as cries, laughter, and accusations filled the air. Each echo seemed tailored to their deepest insecurities. One voice whispered, "You are not brave enough." Another hissed, "You will never protect them." Even the youngest child's echo accused her of cowardice, magnifying her tiniest doubts. Thomas took a deep breath and placed his hands on the children's shoulders. "We are here together. That is our truth. Nothing else matters." The echoes twisted, forming into ghostly apparitions of their past selves, each one mimicking their every move, anticipating their fears. The test intensified. The ground beneath their feet began to ripple as though their steps were disturbing unseen waters. The whispers became sentences, paragraphs, even monologues, recounting every fear, every mistake, every regret they had ever carried. Thomas recognized one familiar echo. It was his own voice, recounting the day he had lost the chance to protect the villagers from the unseelie hunt. His heart ached, but he focused on "I," the Queen's gift, the tongue of truth. "These words are shadows. I will not let shadows dictate my path," he said aloud. The cavern trembled, and a spectral figure appeared at the center, a mirror of Thomas, taller, darker, eyes glowing with judgment. "Face the truth," it commanded. "All you have feared, all you have denied, all you have lost." The figure raised a hand, and the echoes formed into tangible shapes, small, fearful creatures, shadows of the children's memories. Thomas stepped forward, voice steady. "We face them together. None of this is stronger than our bond." The children, though trembling, followed his lead, confronting each echo by naming it, acknowledging it, and letting it pass. One by one, the whispers fell silent, the shadowy figures dissolving into thin air. The cavern calmed. The walls lost their vibrating hum and became still, revealing a small, arched doorway, glowing faintly with silver light. Thomas exhaled, "The echoes are not gone," he said softly, "but they will no longer control us." He led the children through the doorway, stepping into a new chamber where the air felt alive, filled with a scent of wildflowers and the faint hum of magic. This was the threshold of the Fae, the penultimate stage before the heart of the other world itself. Beyond this chamber awaited the heart of the other world, where the final confrontation with the Fae and the resolution of their journey would unfold. The threshold of the Fae opened before them like the mouth of a dream. Silver light pooled across the ground, and the air shimmered with the quiet pulse of power. Thomas felt it in his bones, the heartbeat of a realm older than memory, older than man, yet conscious, aware, and infinitely patient. Every step he took seemed to echo through the space, yet the echoes were not his own. They belonged to the land itself, recording, observing, judging. Ahead, the children hesitated. The youngest clutched Thomas's hand, whispering, "It feels alive, like it's watching us." Thomas nodded, understanding. The heart of the other world was not a place you could walk through casually. It demanded awareness, respect, and courage. One false move, one thought of malice or doubt, and it could twist reality around you. The chamber widened, revealing a pool of liquid silver, still as glass, yet glowing from within. From its depths, figures began to rise, Fae of all kinds, tall and small, winged and limbless, radiant and terrifying. Their eyes were ancient, unreadable, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and challenge. At their center stood a figure taller than all, crowned with living vines and frost, eyes shimmering with both sunlight and storm, the Fairy Queen. Thomas bowed slightly, remembering the lessons of the previous trials. "I seek passage," he said, voice steady. "I come to honor the laws of your world, to protect these children, and to restore balance between our realms." The Queen regarded him silently, and the silver pool began to ripple, reflecting 1,000 possible futures. Each child's fear, every regret Thomas carried, and every potential failure floated across the water. The Queen spoke, her voice a melody of wind and stone. "The gift you carry is both blessing and curse. You have seen the threads of time, yet the path of mortals is fleeting. Choose wisely, for only one truth can remain." Suddenly, visions cascaded across Thomas's mind, the unseelie hunt devouring villages, the cradle of the changeling, the suffering of his own people, and the potential peace he could bring if he sacrificed something dear. The heart demanded a choice: to remain in the other world, wielding unmatched power over fate, or return to the mortal world, preserving the children's lives but surrendering his prophetic abilities. Thomas fell to his knees. He felt the pull of the other world, the temptation to remain among the ageless Fae, free from mortality, a guardian of secrets and time. But then he looked at the children, eyes wide with trust, fragile in their humanity. His heart knew the answer. Power was meaningless. Without love, without life to protect. "I choose the world of mortals," he said firmly. The heart shimmered, the silver pool quaking, and the Queen inclined her head, acknowledging his wisdom. "Then you shall carry the gift, not of foresight, but of courage, and the burden of choice." A wave of light enveloped Thomas, lifting him and the children. The air thrummed with energy, and the voices of the other world whispered blessings and farewells. When the light receded, they stood at the edge of a quiet forest, morning sunlight spilling across the trees. The heart of the other world had accepted his decision, granting safe passage back to life. Yet Thomas knew he would never forget. The silver pool, the whispers, the Queen's gaze, they were etched into his soul, a permanent reminder of a realm beyond mortal reckoning. Ahead lay the mortal world, familiar, yet forever changed. He had returned, carrying not the curse of prophecy, but the wisdom of the ages, and the knowledge that courage, compassion, and respect for the unseen could shape destinies more profoundly than any vision of the future. The forest breathed around them, a living tapestry of green and gold. Thomas led the children along the familiar path, yet nothing felt as it once had. The air seemed thinner, brighter, the sunlight more precious, as if the mortal world had waited for their return. Each step grounded him, reminding him that life, in its fleeting fragility, was more miraculous than any magic he had witnessed. Behind him, the other world shimmered at the edges of perception, a silver echo of what once had been. He could feel its pulse, gentle now, acknowledging his choice. The fair folk had receded, their power no longer pressing against the human realm, but their presence lingered in the wind, in the rustle of leaves, in the moments when shadows danced just beyond reason. They had taught him lessons that could not be unlearned, the cost of curiosity, the peril of bargains, and the eternal duality of creation and destruction. The children, though weary, carried a quiet wonder in their eyes. They had glimpsed the world as it truly was, both terrifying and magnificent, and they would carry the knowledge forever, even if the words to describe it never came. Thomas looked at them and felt a surge of fierce protectiveness, a conviction that the mortal world, though fragile, was worth defending from the unseen dangers that still lingered. As they emerged from the woods into the familiar village, Thomas saw life continuing with gentle oblivion. Farmers tended fields, children played along sunlit paths, and smoke curled from chimneys. Nothing here knew of the silver pools, the unseelie courts, or the changelings hidden in shadow, but he knew. And that knowledge was a seed, planted quietly, ready to shape the future. He paused at the village square, feeling the weight of all that had transpired. The gifts and curses of the fair folk were not just about magic or terror, they were mirrors, reflecting the human heart. Courage, compassion, and humility were their true wards against the unseen. By choosing life over power, Thomas had learned that the most profound magic was not in seeing the future, but in shaping it through choices and deeds. At twilight, Thomas returned to the edge of the woods. The wind carried a familiar whisper, a reminder that the fair folk had not vanished. They were merely waiting, patient and eternal, in the places humans had forgotten. He left an offering of iron and salt, a gesture of respect, and in return, the forest seemed to sigh in acknowledgement. Balance had been preserved, and the unseen boundaries between worlds remained intact. Thomas understood then that stories, myths, and warnings were not merely for entertainment, they were guides. The tales of the Speen, Changeling, the Unseelie Hunt, and the Fey Courts had survived centuries because they contained truths that humans could not afford to forget. The wilderness, the mystery, the danger, all of it endured, reminding humanity of its limits and its obligations. As night fell, Thomas looked up at the stars, and for the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. The children slept soundly, protected and safe, their innocence preserved. The fair folk might still watch, waiting for a world grown quiet. But for now, the human realm was theirs to cherish. And so, the hidden kingdom of the fair folk, the twilight world of danger and beauty, remained just beyond the veil, a reminder that magic is not always gentle, that respect is survival, and that the world, both mortal and fey, is far more wondrous than we dare to imagine. Thomas turned toward home, heart steady, knowing that the greatest adventure was not in visiting other worlds, but in living this one wisely.